further development, and et cetera. So we're going to start off with Peter Hurley from Portland. Peter's a senior transportation policy planner for the Portland Bureau of Transportation. He was the founder of or co-founder of the North American Sustainable Transportation Council and the Cascadia Green Council. He chairs the Transportation Committee for Snohomish County, Washington. Served on the Puget Sound Regional Council, and was a governor's appointee for 3 4-year terms in the Washington State Commute Trip Reduction Board. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Tara. I appreciate the opportunity to share with folks on the call some of the actions that Portland is taking to cut our transportation climate pollution. Carol, if you would advance to the next slide, please. So I'll start with a little background, then talk about what we're doing in our 20-year TSP and our 5-year strategic plan. I'll also briefly cover our development of a performance evaluation system and our work with ODOT and Metro to use the Vision Eval scenario evaluation tool. Overall, I'll try to describe a series of actions that create a system of policies, programs, and projects that hopefully are going to lead to improving access, equity, and safety, while eventually eliminating transportation climate pollution. And I'll emphasize what we're trying to create as a system, because we need more than a project evaluation tool, more than a TSP, more than a modeling tool. We will need a system of actions to produce the type of reductions that Oregon has committed to, which should be easy, right? Carol, if you would advance to the next slide. So a little bit of background. Our work on transportation is one critical element of a larger vision. Portland adopted our first climate action plan in 1990. And our most recent climate action plan was adopted in 2015. And the climate action plan, I should note, is across all sectors. And we're attempting to look at it both as from a source perspective and from a use perspective. So very much a comprehensive climate action plan. The current climate action plan includes 2030 and 2050 targets for transportation greenhouse gas emissions. It also includes a vehicle mile reduction target and a mode share target, a commute mode share target, based on what was best available climate science at the time. What it doesn't include is an analysis of or a plan to achieve those targets. So there are nearly 4 dozen actions that have been identified in the plan, but what we didn't do is model to what extent those actions might move us toward the targets. So the CAP has some strengths and some weaknesses. More recently in 2020, our city council adopted an even more aggressive climate target, achieving net zero across all sectors by 2050, actually getting to net zero. So taking a deep breath on that one. We don't know how we're going to get there. The vision is there though. So next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about a few key elements in Portland's Transportation System Plan, our TSP, which was adopted in 2018. We worked with Metro's Regional Travel Demand Modeling Team to forecast 2035 car and truck vehicle volumes. And it was immediately apparent that there was a pretty critical problem, that business as usual was unsustainable for access and mobility, congestion, even safety and equity, as well as climate. We decided to set a goal of no increase in drive-alone trips over our 2010 baseline, which means shifting about 500,000 trips a day. That upper line, the status quo line that shows a little over 2 million trips projected in 2035, down to the baseline of 2010. So little over 538,000 trips a day that we would need to shift to other modes. So all of our travel growth would come from something other than driving alone, be it transit or telework, bicycling, or walking. Next slide, please. So the very short version of a very long multi-year conversation is that in order to advance the multiple goals that I'll talk about momentarily, we needed to move more people and goods much more efficiently. So we established a series of targets, including reducing climate pollution by 50%, reducing vehicle miles traveled by 40%, recognizing that cars will be getting cleaner over time, so you don't have to have the same VMT reduction as your GHG reduction, and increasing mode share from around 45% non-drive alone in 2015 to about 70% non-drive alone by 2035. So Carol, if you move to the next slide, please. We evaluated, there were 410 candidate projects with cost estimates over $500,000 and a dozen program areas, programs like transportation demand management and bicycle network completion. So we created a small panel to use both quantitative and qualitative methods to give a numeric score for each project for each of the 7 criteria on the screen. These were the criteria we decided to use to evaluate all our projects and programs. Most of what we did, as Chris was talking about a moment ago, was qualitative evaluation. So we used the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association, the CAPCOA greenhouse gas emission document that I know some of the folks on the call today were authors of that document. That was very helpful for us in evaluating the climate implications of a number of our project types. The best projects rated highly on multiple criteria. We decided that we were not interested in advancing projects that scored well on just 1 or 2 or even 3 of the criteria. What we didn't do is rank projects from number 1 to 410 and then start trying to fund number 1, then number 2, then number 3. Instead, what we did is put the projects into 3 buckets. The highest scoring projects went into the first bucket, those that we want to implement in the first 10 years of our transportation system plan. And there might be somebody who has their microphone on, by the way. So if you don't have it on mute, if you would please do so, that would be great. Sounds like there's some background going on. Thank you. The second bucket were projects that we'd like to advance if we're able to afford them in the second 10 years of our transportation system plan. And the third bucket were projects that didn't make the cut because they didn't sufficiently advance enough criteria. There were relatively few projects that fell into that third category, but there were some that we identified that we just weren't going to advance in our TSP. So next slide, please. Very quickly, how are we doing? It's only been a couple of years since we adopted the TSP, but many of the projects and programs and policies we were already starting to implement. It's a bit daunting that while we are starting to move in the right direction, we are moving there modestly at best. We've seen about a 2% reduction in transportation greenhouse gas emissions from our 1990 baseline to the most recent data that we have for 2019. Total VMT continues to increase in the city of Portland, at least among residents of the city, while per capita VMT is decreasing. So it's starting to bend the curve, but definitely not enough. We are making some modest progress on mode share, particularly telework, obviously, since the pandemic that has skyrocketed. But even before that, telework was the fastest growing mode, in addition to bicycling, although bicycling has plateaued in the city as of 2019. And then, so one of the big lessons that we've learned from the pretty modest evaluation and monitoring that we've been doing is that climate-friendly projects are not enough, the carrots, so to speak. We're going to need stronger TDM and pricing programs, more mixed-use development, and fewer or no additional vehicle lanes constructed if we're actually going to make even more progress toward the targets. So moving to the next slide, I'll briefly cover our strategic plan. This is our shorter term goal. And you'll notice in the upper left of the slide, it says 2019 to 2022. That was the original plan. With the pandemic, we've extended that a couple of years to go from a 3-year to a 5-year strategic plan. The focus is going to be on centering climate and equity, developing key performance measures, and a new mobility performance standard, as well as evaluating pricing and other strategies. Moving to the next slide. The key performance areas that we've identified and the key performance measures that we're moving toward based on that climate and equity lens fall into those 3 categories you see on the screen: access, efficiency, and health. You'll notice that both efficiency and health include VMT measures. The efficiency piece is person miles traveled divided by vehicle miles traveled for space efficiency. And then there's a very explicit VMT and GHG target, performance measure in the health category. Underlying it all is an equity evaluation to both assess and address disparities, which is a really critical piece that I want to emphasize across all of our key performance areas. Moving to the next slide. We've identified that while our goals and our targets are a nice vision, goals and targets are only as good as the actions behind them. So we've been working with ODOT, thank you Tara, thank you Brian, and with Metro, thank you Taya, to use a tool that has been used in multiple parts of the state and other parts of the US called Vision Eval. It was also used actually in the region, a previous version, Green Step. I think Kim might reference that. It's a strategic evaluation tool to understand which policy and program areas could be particularly effective at reducing transportation climate pollution and advancing some of our other goals. It is not a project evaluation tool, though it can help identify the types of projects that are likely to either reduce or increase climate pollution to some extent. The next slide is a summary of one of our big learnings. We did an initial round of work with Vision Eval in 2020, which was valuable in helping us understand which areas to focus on to move us toward our goals. And our first and perhaps most important finding was that among the 11 scenarios we tested, we found that while each individual policy bundle is effective to some degree, the combination of policy bundles, specifically carrots and sticks, could be significantly more effective at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, VMT, and disparities. So carrots meaning actions that encourage people to take other modes, not only building infrastructure, but also TDM and other benefits, combined with sticks, actions that discourage low value trips like pricing signals, adding less parking or no additional parking, no additional lanes. Our current work with ODOT and Metro, what we're calling phase 2, is doing sensitivity testing to evaluate which carrots and which sticks are particularly effective both in the short term and in the long term. So final slide. Where are we heading with this? Where might we go from here? I think we're reasonably likely to adopt a new mobility performance standard that focuses on access and efficiency. We may consider adopting near-term greenhouse gas and VMT reduction targets for 2025 and 2030, and a vehicle model reduction plan based on our vision eval work. It's more and more I've come to believe that focusing on the next few years rather than the long-term goals are particularly important, because we've been adopting targets for a couple of decades now, and those targets have been far enough out that we've been able to, for the most part, put off the really important actions we need to take in the short term. We also are working towards starting to produce an annual system performance report that might help us refine our strategies more regularly than a TSP or even a strategic planning cycle. So overall, we're trying to build a system that develops, evaluates, and monitors policies, programs, and projects that are most likely to advance our goals. I've heard it called a virtuous cycle or a virtuous circle. So with that, I will turn it back over to Chris.
Thanks, Peter. That was a great overview